Hey guys, we are going to be looking at The Great Gatsby, chapter 5, because there's a lot of really good content here that you ought to be reading on your own, but I think some of the details might end up getting lost in sort of the mix up of all of the language and the length of the chapter. So primarily what I want you to think about with chapter 5 are just sort of the questions that you might have. One question, for instance, would be, wait, is this like, what is this book about? Is this a love story? Is this a story about, like, is it a tragedy? What genre of story is this? Because um, at one point it's somewhat mysterious, and now in chapter 5 it's launching into this sort of an intricate but confused love story. Um, and the details are quite intriguing. So at the beginning of the chapter, a couple things I want to point out is that Gatsby meets Nick one evening when he comes home, and it says that the whole town or the whole block, the whole peninsula was lit up from Gatsby's house from all that was going on there. And as he gets out of the taxi, Gatsby walked toward him, and it says, "Your place looks like the World Fair," I said. "Does it?" He turned his eyes toward it absently. "I've been glancing into some of the rooms. Let's go to Coney Island, old sport, in my car." It was too late. "Well, suppose we take a plunge in the swimming pool. I haven't made use of it all summer." "I have to go to bed." "All right." I want you to note a couple things. Gatsby has so many people at his house that the entire peninsula is lit up, and yet he is eager like a little boy that doesn't have a friend. That's like, "Hey, do you want to go do this?" "Oh, no, sorry, I have to work the next day." "Oh, do you want to go do this?" "Oh, well, sorry." And it's this sense of his loneliness in spite of being completely surrounded by an abundance of wealth. Um, as we scroll further, Gatsby almost gets frustrated that Nick has to go to bed, and he says, uh, where is it? Oh, okay. So he offers him a job, and so he says, "I carry on a little side business, a sort of sideline, you understand, and I thought if you don't make very much money, you're selling bonds. Well, this would interest you. It wouldn't take up much of your time, and you might pick up a nice bit of money. It happens to be a rather confidential sort of thing." So again, that speaks to the source of Gatsby's wealth. Um, and Nick says, "No thanks, I have my hands full. I'm much obliged, but I couldn't take on any more work." "Well, you wouldn't have to do any business with Wolfshame." Evidently, he thought that I was shying away from the connection mentioned at lunch, but I assured him he was wrong. He waited a moment longer, hoping I'd begin a conversation, but I was too absorbed in my response to be responsive, so he went unwillingly home. Um, During this time, Gatsby is he asks Nick if he would arrange a meeting between Nick and Daisy. I'm sorry, between Gatsby and Daisy at Nick's house, since Daisy is oh my goodness, yeah, Daisy is Nick's cousin. And so Nick agrees, and he invites Daisy over um, to his house, and Gatsby is there ready to talk to her, but not before he has Nick's lawn mowed, and he brings over lots of like fancy food and other things to try to impress her along the way. So Daisy arrives at Nick's house, and Gatsby is incredibly nervous. It's weird. Remember, we talked about Gatsby having two personas? He has the persona of like, "I'm cool, I'm a businessman, I have tons of money, I've got this." But then on the other hand, he's incredibly insecure, and it says that Nick sees right through him to the point that he's sort of just this um, well dressed, um, middle class guy from Central America, sorry, like kind of the center of the United States. Like, he's not East Coast bred, he doesn't have class, he doesn't have a legacy of wealth. That's that new money tendency that we've been discussing. And so, certainly, when Daisy shows up at the house, Gatsby is a mess. Um, I really think you guys should read this section because it's sort of like what happens when you encounter somebody that you were in love with like years before. So there are some really awkward moments and some decently interesting moments. Um, And so when Gatsby arrives at the house, he's pale as death, and his hands are plunged like weights in his coat pockets, and he stands in a puddle of water, glaring tragically into Nick's eyes. He's a mess. And yet, as the encounter continues, um, he runs out of the room to go talk to Nick. And he says, "This is a terrible mistake." And he was shaking from side to side. A terrible, terrible mistake. "You're just embarrassed, that's all. And luckily I added Daisy's embarrassed too." "She's embarrassed?" he repeated incredulously. "Just as much as you are." "Don't talk so loud." "You're acting like a little boy," I broke out impatiently. "Not only that, but you're rude. Daisy's sitting there all alone." So here again is this instance where Nick is trumping Gatsby, even in social graces and social manners, which Nick is supposed to be the lower class of the two. And yet he shows his breeding, I guess you could say, to be far superior to Gatsby. So as we're trying to guess who is Gatsby, when he tells that story about being from a family of wealth, we're meant to see through his facade here and be like, I don't think so. You wouldn't act this way if you were. So Nick goes outside for a while. He's looking at Gatsby's house and just kind of making some observations. But when he comes back inside, he sees Gatsby and Daisy together. Daisy's face is smeared with tears. But it says there was a change in Gatsby. It was simply confounding. He literally glowed. And without a word or a gesture of exultation, a new well-being radiated from him and filled the little room. "Oh, hello, old sport," he said, as if he hadn't seen me for years. I thought for a moment he was going to shake hands with me. And so, again, Gatsby has regained his composure and is incredibly in control of himself and putting forward the confidence that he generally manifests. So they go on to, please read the details. It's really interesting. But at that point, they decide to take a walk to Gatsby's house because he wants to show Daisy everything in his house. And I'm going to leave you to all of those details. He shows her everything. But one of the most important and minute elements of this is they're walking into his room. And so Nick is there as well. And he's showing her, like, he opens his hulking cabinets, which would be like his closet, and they hold his massive suits and his dressing gowns and his ties and his shirts piled like bricks in stacks a dozen high. I have a man in England who buys me clothes. He sends over a selection of things at the beginning of each season, spring and fall. He took out a pile of shirts, and he began throwing them, one by one, before us, shirts of sheer linen and thick silk and fine flannel. They lost their folds as they fell and covered the table in many-colored disarray. While we admired that he brought more and more of this soft, rich heap, it mounted higher, shirts with stripes and scrolls and plaids and coral and apple green and lavender and orange and monograms of Indian blue. And suddenly, with a strained sound, Daisy bent her head into the shirts, and she began to cry stormily. "They're such beautiful shirts," she sobbed, her voice muffled in thick folds. "It makes me sad, because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before." What is that about? It's a line that has always sort of puzzled students, and honestly, I haven't heard a lot of people or seen a lot online that discusses the symbolism of the shirts. It's definitely a symbol that we've encountered. And if you probe it further, if you think about a shirt, it's an internal piece of fabric or an internal piece of clothing. At the time that this was written, he wouldn't have talked about undergarments. And so this is as intimately personal as you really could get. And if you think about if a person is going to try and parade his or her wealth around with regard to what he or she is wearing, you're going to wear it on the outside. You're going to buy like a pair of shoes or a coat or a tie or something that people would see inherently. But with a shirt, it was customary with the dress of this time, you always have to wear a jacket over it and some other things. And so if a person, in the same way that the books in the library were real, these shirts are real and they're genuine and their quality, showing the depth and breadth and significance of his wealth. If he's willing and has the capacity to spend as much money as he does on his undergarments, which are his shirts, that his wealth is absolutely lucrative. It's not fake. It's um it's something that Daisy sees and she just dissolves in tears. Why does that make her cry? Well, a couple of reasons, potentially. Obviously, we don't know for sure. One is that she realizes, whoa, I could have had this. This is like she has this craving for money and wealth, which some readings could support that. I think it goes deeper. It's clear Daisy herself says that she was in love with Gatsby, and yet she was forbidden to marry him. Why? Because he didn't have wealth, he didn't have money, he didn't have standing. So it's like you give up the love of your life because he doesn't have um, what you or your family deem enough material goods. And now she sees that he does have it. And it's like, I could have had that. I lost the love of my life for nothing. And she sees the foolishness of her decision in complying with what her parents and her social class um, required. And she dissolves in tears because she's in a loveless marriage. And so, like, what's the lesson? What's the takeaway here? Um, it could be something extremely simple, or it could be much more complex. It could be as simple as, hey, it could be as simple as the superficiality of people in this culture to weep over shirts. It shows it's ridiculous, but it also could show that what are the elements that we deem absolutely necessary? Like, oh, this person has to be, and I've heard it from guys in this class, I need to marry someone tall, or I need to marry somebody that is X, Y, or Z. Or I need to get into a school that has these particular qualifications. And then later in life, you realize that didn't matter. Those things don't matter in the context of what you learn over time is actually much more important. And so I would never say that Daisy and Gatsby's love is ever really anything to be emulated or worthwhile. However, what it does signify is to not allow superficial means to prevent you from making decisions that are ultimately good. And I think that is the theme that can be, extracted from this particular section. I'll tell you again, just read it. It's so interesting, like the extent of his wealth and everything that they see. Gatsby and Daisy are talking, and it's as if Nick has disappeared from the room. Gatsby takes Daisy's hand. They start dancing. He turns toward her with a rush of emotion. They'd forgotten me. Daisy glanced up and she held out her hand, and that's as Nick was leaving. Gatsby didn't know me at all. I looked once more at them, and they looked back at me, remotely possessed by intense life. Then I went out of the room, down the marble steps into the rain, leaving them there together. So, that's how to read chapter 5 in depth. And I look forward to your comments on Flipgrid about what you guys took from it. So I'll wait for your comments there.